Hello, my name is Ethan Kovalenko, and I am an application developer with a deep desire to understand how everything works, technology included. I've studied and worked with coding languages for the past 3 years and joined Savvy Coders to strengthen that experience to help me become a more proficient and more productive web developer. I worked in an agile environment as I led my team as a product owner, making sure that everyone was up to date on what tasks needed to be accomplished for the week and to see if anyone was struggling with their progress. When starting new sprints in Jira, my team and I created user stories and assigned appropriate amounts of story points to determine the effort needed for each one. We performed daily stand ups that entailed my responsibilities as a product owner, as well as end of sprint retrospectives to discuss what our teams have learned and what we all could improve on. Over the course of 10 weeks, I am glad to say that my teammates and I have all become Agile certified. Now, the act of being productive can be thwarted by several variables. Some of the biggest blockades I've found are figuring out where to start, how to balance productivity with pleasure, and not being able to see any of your progress. Wouldn't it be nice to have an app aimed to bring users a feeling of fulfillment and peace of mind? An app where your Advent task is to put everything you aim to accomplish within a single day. You can name those tasks, give them the time you wish to focus on each one to accomplish your daily goals with. And then you could view your overall progress with a series of tailored graphs and charts and enjoy the satisfaction of knowing that you are succeeding at your hard work. If that sounds like you, well, then I'm very excited to introduce you to Priora. My first iterations of what I wanted. It mostly stayed the same, but is lacking some of the final content so as to finish the product in time. Looking at the inception of Priora, we can see some of the core ideas that reverberate throughout the entire capstone, such as adding tasks, goal orientation, and timers. I wanted this to be an application for anyone, but it would be particularly useful for those who aren't just going through the motions of life but are trying to better themselves as much as possible. Seeing as how chaotic life is, this is meant to bring a small piece of order into anyone's day. I started out with the concept of 6 pages and planned to accomplish that, but as you can see, it was quite an ambitious start. Continuing on with prototyping, I developed a small user flow to keep me on track for when I was going to start linking pages. Everything would stem from this ubiquitous navigation sidebar. The only other main movements would be centered around the Create Tasks page. Continuing on with the wireframing part, I had an absolute blast. I'm finally realizing that a lot of what I have here is not too different from what I have now. It's fascinating how programming allows for imaginations to seamlessly translate into reality. Now, let me show you what that reality looks like. So, Priora is a single page application, which means that only one document is loaded into the web browser. However, through the power of JavaScript fetch requests, it is capable of updating the content of that loaded document to match specific view, such as an about, contact, or home view. The home view of Priora displays the main purpose of this application that users will be drawn to utilizing: charts, timers, and graphs. I've split these three main home components into a 3x3 cell grid layout in my CSS, making sure to accentuate each element. The tasks chart and bottom right radar graph are both classes derived from the chart.js library. From researching the library's documentation, I was able to create interactive charts filled with user data. When users have tasks posted to the database, they appear here as arcs containing information from each task. When clicking an arc, the respective timer will begin at the top right, and the radar chart will display the spread of the 5 main types of tasks: exercise, work, study, sleep, and other for the day. Speaking of tasks, here is a simple form that allows for users to post a task into the Mongo database with inputs such as title, type, time, color, and even additional notes. Specifically, with the type input, we can choose exercise, which allows for another input for users to select a specific exercise they would like to complete for that goal from a third-party API known as Wager. Now, if we go ahead and create a task, we can go ahead and see that once we create it, it sends us to the home page with that task data filled into the arc. And now we have our timer going. Continuing on, the About view simply displays information about the application. And then on our contact view, we have a form powered by the Form Spree library to have a tailored email sent to the developer. And finally, the settings page allows for users to easily change the theme of Priora from dark to light mode. Regarding the build process, due to previous experience, the HTML portion of Priora came rather easily when it came to creating simple structures such as forms and navigation bars. However, despite experience, CSS, I believe, requires constant practice, as the multitude of attributes being selected and hundreds of properties being added to each one can quickly cause any developer to lose track of which style works best for an element. However, I find my proudest moment of CSS to be when styling the sidebar on a smaller screen. It is tied with a click event handler on JavaScript for the chevron, but performs a wonderful animation for the sidebar to pop out and disappear on a mobile view. Now, seeing as how JavaScript takes up nearly 80% of the code base, there are a plethora of examples on how Priora incorporates it all into its processes. Some notable portions are where a for-of loop populates a list of usable arrays for the charts after pulling data from the application's REST API. Or how the click event handler for an intersection and an arc on the chart allows for users to examine the data they've input, start a timer, and even allow for deleting a task. When starting Savvy Coders, I had had some experience with application programming interfaces, but not to the extent of fully developing one. This was one of the more challenging but extremely enthralling experiences during the cohort. Using Express, I placed down the basic structure of the backend server handler to deal with routes and making sure everything is connected with middleware. From there, I developed a schema for Priora to validate task inputs, which would then be sent off to the routers for several usable CRUD methods, also handled with Express. Once the backend was complete, I was able to test the functionality of these methods using Insomnia and finally connect it all to MongoDB and render for a remote data storage source that users could create and get information from wherever they are. Once all the difficult bits were sorted, I was excited to finally deploy Priora to Netafly for everyone to access. Simply connecting my GitHub repository and setting all the necessary keys for APIs allowed for a fully functioning remote full-stack application. Throughout this process, I received helpful feedback from friends, primarily on CSS implementations. However, their main contribution was their support for me to continue working, even though I was stuck on a problem or even thought of starting from scratch again. Without their belief in me, Priora might not be here today. Speaking of problems, the largest one has to be how the bottom right graph on the home page displays its data. At line 281, we can see the data that would be placed inside the radar graph. It includes things such as labels, which would be the exercise, work, study, sleep, and other titles. And then within the dataset array, we have our data key, which holds the data for the different times based off the types. Now, each of these arrays are cross-referenced with each other so that the first index of the labels array matches the first index of the data times array. Now, my goal was to have each label exist regardless if there was any time added to the data times array, as users may not plan to exercise that day or study. However, that will cause the data times array to have missing indexes, which will cause there to be mismatches between the labels and times. Therefore, we either get something where the labels don't exist or don't have the right amount of time. So, how do we fix this? Well, I create an array that I push objects into that include the type and time properties. From there, we use the .from and .reduce methods to develop a new array of objects where it checks if the type property pops up multiple times. If it does, it will add the times together, or it'll just give us a 0 if there's nothing there. Finally, I go ahead and create a sort method to make sure that the labels are ordered correctly in case a user decided to not put the inputs in the correct order, which is likely. And then I create a switch case statement that loops to push the times into the correct order based on the index of its associated type. And if there is no time, then it would push a 0, which will fill in the gaps between any missing times, allowing for all labels to exist and be matched correctly with their added times. So there were many sleepless nights from this portion, but I was able to find a path, and therefore, not only was this my biggest obstacle, but also my greatest achievement. So what would I like for a future state? Well, there are a plethora of different things. First off, user authentication so that users' tasks aren't mixed up with everyone else's who uses the app. I would love a better timer with a pause play functionality. On that subject, I would like to add alarms and a clock GUI to tie in with the task chart for a better display of where users are throughout their day. I would love to have an update method for my tasks weekly, not just daily radar graph data, better third-party query parameters for wager. I would love to finish the badges page to tie in user achievements, like how I have on my mural, and just better overall documentation and health information for users creating exercise and sleep tasks. And undoubtedly, this list will always continue to grow. I would like to thank you so much for viewing this presentation on Priora, and I hope you get to try it out soon. Thank you.